Welcome back for day three of becoming more well read. Back at it again with the Steve Jobs. You know, um, where we left off last time was Scully. He won that a little argument. Put Steve in the corner. He feeling like a tiger. Things happen badly when a tiger is in the corner. But they ended up winning the marketing budget for Scully, charging over 500, slowing the sales of the Mac, leading to Microsoft being able to get more share of it and stuff like that. But like I said, Jobs feel like he in the corner. Um, we are on chapter 15, page 159. It is titled "The Launch: A Dent in the Universe." So, real artist ship. The high point of the October 19 The high point of the October 1983 Apple sales conference in Hawaii was a skit based on a TV show called The Dating Game. Jobs played MC, and his three contestants, whom he had convinced to fly to Hawaii, were Bill Gates and two other software executives, Mitch Caper and Fred Gibbons. As the show's jingly theme song played, the three took their stools. Gates, looking like a high school sophomore, got wild applause from the 750 Apple salesmen when he said, during 1984, Microsoft expects to get half of its revenue from software for the Macintosh. Jobs, clean shaven and bouncy, gave a toothy smile and asked if he thought that the Macintosh new operating system would become one of the industry's new standards. Gates answered, to create a new standard takes not just making something that's a little bit different, it takes something that's really new and captures people's imagination. And the Macintosh of all the and the Macintosh of all the machines I've ever seen is the only one that meets that standard. But even as Gates was speaking, Microsoft was edging away from being primarily a collaborator with Apple to being more of a competitor. It would continue to make application software like Microsoft Word for Apple, but a rapidly increasing share of its revenue would come from the operating system it had written for the IBM personal computer. The year before, 279,000 Apple IIs were sold, compared to 240,000 IBM PCs and its clones. But the figures for the 1983 but the figures for the 1983 but the figures for 1983 were coming in starkly different. 420 420 420,000 Apple IIs versus 1.3 million IBMs and its clones. And both the Apple III and the Lisa were dead in the water. Just when the Apple sales force was arriving in Hawaii, this shift was hammered home on the cover of Business Week. Its headline, Personal Computers, and the winner is IBM. The story inside detailed the rise of the IBM PC. The battle for the market supremacy is already over, the magazine declared. In a stunning blitz, IBM has taken more than 26% of the market in 2 years and is expected to account for half the world market by 1985. An additional 25% of the market will be turning out IBM compatible machines. That put all the more pressure on Macintosh. Due out in due out in January 1984, 3 months away, to save the day against IBM. At the sales conference, Jobs decided to play the showdown to the hilt. He took the stage and chronicled all the missteps made by IBM since 1958, and then in ominous tones described how it was now trying to take over the market for personal computers. Will Big Blue dominate the entire computer industry? The entire information age? Was George Orwell right about 1984? At that moment, a screen came down from the ceiling and showed a preview of an upcoming 60-second television ad for the Macintosh. In a few months, it was destined to make advertising history. But in the meantime, it served its purpose of rallying Apple's demoralized sales force. Jobs had always been able to draw energy by imagining himself as a rebel pitted against the forces of darkness. Now he was able to energize his troops and the same vision. So did Scully help with the advertisement? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, he's still there. Had gotta be, shoot. But nah, I like that though. Like the antics of being able to you know, cause nowadays don't nobody like the major corporations that don't care about nobody. Everybody want to rock with the underdog. The Rockies. Everybody want to rock with that. Sure, I rock with that. I want to see the little man come in, get to it, and win it and win. Shoot, that's why March Madness is big. You got the little dogs that come in there and they get to it. They got Elite Eight. One of these days we're gonna have a champion from them. And you ain't gonna be able to tell nobody nothing. It's gonna be a shift in time too though. It ain't gonna be all that high major. A lot of people gonna try to see what they can do at that mid major, that low major. But either way, Scully had to make that. Nice ad. Nice nice jab at the big man. Big mountain things, you heard? But there was one more hurdle. Hertzfeld and the other Wizards had to finish writing the code for the Macintosh. It was due to start shipping on Monday, January 16th. 1 week before that, the engineers concluded that they could not make that deadline. Jobs was at the Grand Hyatt in Manhattan preparing for the press preview, so a Sunday morning conference call was scheduled. The software manager calmly explained the situation to Jobs, while Hertzfeld and the others huddled around the speakerphone, holding their breath. All they needed was an extra 2 weeks. The initial shipments to the dealers could have a version of the software labeled demo, and these could be replaced as soon as the new code was finished at the end of the month. There was a pause. Jobs did not get angry. Instead, he spoke in cold, somber tones. He told them they were really great. So great, in fact, that he knew that they could get this done. There's no way we're slipping, he declared. There was a collective gasp in the Banley building workspace. You guys have been working on this stuff for months now. Another couple weeks is going to make that much of a difference. Isn't going to make that much of a difference. You may as well get it over with. I'm going to ship the code a week from Monday with your names on it. I like that switch up. Instead of, just trying to berate them, it's like, man, you guys are great. Like, you guys are so good. Like, we can get this done. We can get this done. And I'm on your side. Like, we on the same team here. Like, let's get this done, man. You guys are so great. We've been working on it for so long. Like, the structure is already there. The backbone is there. Like, a couple more weeks, it's not gonna make a difference. I like that. That's good. Steve is good. Monday with your names on it. Well, we got to finish it. Steve Cap said, and so they did. Oh, okay. Let's do this. Okay, and so they did. Once again, Jobs' reality distortion field pushed them to do what they had thought impossible. On Friday, Randy Wigginton brought in a huge bag of chocolate-covered espresso beans for the final 3 all-nighters. When Jobs arrived at work at 8:30 a.m. that Monday, he found Hertzfeld sprawled, nearly comatose on the couch. They talked for a few minutes about a remaining tiny glitch, and Job decreed that it wasn't a problem. Hertzfeld dragged himself to his blue Volkswagen Rabbit, license plate MacWiz, and drove home to bed. A short while later, Apple's Fremont factory began to roll out boxes emblazoned with the colorful line drawings of the Macintosh. Real artists ship, Jobs had declared, and now the Macintosh team had. (1984) ad. In the spring of 1983, when Jobs had begun to plan for the Macintosh launch, he asked for a commercial that was revolutionary and astonishing as the product as the product they had created. I want something that would stop people in their tracks, he said. I want a thunderclap. The task fell to the Chiat / Day Advertising Agency, which had acquired the Apple account when it. So Scully didn't even do it. Marketing, advertising, thought it all was the same. Which had acquired the Apple account when it bought the advertising side of Regis McKenna's business. The person put in charge was a lanky beach bum with a bushy beard, wild hair, goofy grin, and twinkling eyes named Lee Clow, who was the creative director of the agency's office in the Venice Beach section of Los Angeles. Clow was savvy and fun in a laid-back yet focused way, and he forged a bond with Jobs that would last 3 decades. Cloud and two of his team, the copywriter Steve Hayden and the art director Brent Thomas, had been toying with a tagline that played off the George Orwell novel, "Why 1984 won't be like 1984." Jobs loved it. He asked them to develop it for the Macintosh launch. So they put together a storyboard for a 60-second ad that would look like a scene from a sci-fi movie. It featured a rebellious young woman outrunning the Orwellian thought police and throwing a sledgehammer into a screen showing a mind-controlling speech by Big Brother. The concept captured the Zeitgeist. It looked German. Zeitgeist of the personal computer. German. On some Big Brother fighting Nazis. I like that. I like the theme. I like the unrunning theme. Um, Zeitgeist. Where was that? Zeitgeist of the personal computer revolution. Many young people, especially those in the counterculture, had viewed computers as instruments that could be used by Orwellian governments and giant corporations to sap individuality. But by the end of the 1970s, they were also being seen as potential tools for personal empowerment. The ad cast Macintosh as a warrior for the latter tool, for the latter cause, a cool, rebellious, and heroic company that was the only thing standing in the way of big evil corporations planned for world domination and total mind control. Jobs like that. Indeed, the concept for the ad had a special resonance for him. He fancied himself a rebel, and he liked to associate himself with the values of the ragtag band of hackers and pirates he recruited to the Macintosh team. Even though he had left um, the Apple commune in Oregon to start the Apple Corporation, he still wanted to be viewed as a descendant of the counterculture rather than the corporate culture. But he also realized deep inside that he had increasingly abandoned the hacker spirit. Some might even accuse him of selling out. When Wozniak held true to the homebrew ethic by sharing his design for the Apple One for free, it was Jobs who insisted that they sell the boards instead. He was also the one who, despite Wozniak's reluctance, wanted to turn Apple into a corporation and not freely distribute stock options to the friends who had been in the garage with them. Now he was about to launch the Macintosh, a machine that violated many of the principles of the hacker's code. It was overpriced. It would have no slots, which meant that hobbyists could not plunge in their own expansion cards or jack into the motherboard to add their own new functions. It took special tools just to open the plastic case. It was a closed and controlled system, like something designed by Big Brother rather than by a hacker. That's crazy. You got the, because we still use Apple today, but it's like, he's like coming up, he want to be the little man and play the little man role, and yeah, man, like everybody black bear, come bear arms with me, like we going to take down the Big Brother. But it's like in the midst of all that chaos and stuff like that, he trying to become Big Brother, or not even try to become Big Brother, but like he want that control. Very interesting. So it's like all those times when we have these revolutions, let's look to see who leading the revolution and how they gain. Even with Trump, like cool boom, everybody looking at like the bombing and stuff like that. But how does he gain? How does he gain? Or the this bill or this law and that law, and everybody think that this law is about whatever that law is about. It could be rights of voting, rights of housing, rights of whatever, rights of minimum wage. Is like they just sign it because they see the minimum wage. Who might be signing in let people get a third term. You know what I'm saying? Huh. So the 1984 ad was a way of reaffirming to himself and to the world his desired self-belief. The heroine, with a drawing of a Macintosh emblazoned on her pure white tank top, was a renegade out to foil the establishment. By hiring Ridley Scott, fresh off the success of Blade Runner, as their director, Jobs could attach himself and Apple to the cyberpunk ethos of the time. With the ad, Apple could identify itself with the rebels and the hackers who thought differently, and Jobs could reclaim his right to identify with them as well. Scully was initially skeptical when he saw the storyboards, but Jobs insisted that they needed something revolutionary. He was able to get an unprecedented budget of $750,000 just to film the ad, which they planned to premiere during the Super Bowl. Ridley Scott made it in London using $750,000. You know what I said? $500 for marketing. What was that? I think that came up to like 250 million. Nah, 25 million. Nah, it was like 250 million. But unprecedented budget of 750,000 just to film the ad. When they plan to premiere during the Super Bowl commercial, ain't it? You know what I'm saying? Um, when they plan to premiere during the Super Bowl, Ridley Scott made it in London using dozens of real skinheads among the enthralled masses listening to Big Brother on the screen. A female discus thrower was chosen to play the heroine, using heroine, heroine, using a cold industrial setting dominated by metallic gray hues. Scott evoked the dystopian aura of Blade Runner. Just at the moment when Big Brother announced "We shall prevail," the heroine's hammer smashes the screen and it vaporizes in a flash of light and smoke. When Jobs previewed the ad for the Apple Salesforce at the meeting in Hawaii, they were thrilled. So he screened it for the board at its December 1983 meeting. When the lights came back on in the boardroom, everyone was mute. Philip Schlein, the CEO of Macy's California, had his head on the table. Mike Merculis stared silently. At first, it seemed he was overwhelmed by the power of the ad. Then he spoke. "Who wants to move to find a new agency?" Scully reclaimed. Ha! Look at Scully. "Who wants to move to find a new agency?" Scully recalled. Most of them thought it was the worst commercial they had ever seen. Scully himself got cold feet. He asked Chiat/Day to sell off the two commercial spots, one 60-second and the other 30, that they had purchased. Jobs was beside himself. One evening, Wozniak, who had been floating into and out of Apple for the previous 2 years, wandered into the Macintosh building. Jobs grabbed him and said, "Come over here and look at this." He put out a VCR and played the ad. "I was astounded," Woz recalled. "I thought it was the most incredible thing." When Jobs said the board had decided not to run it during the Super Bowl, Wozniak asked what the cost of the time slot was. Jobs told him 800,000. With his usual impulsive goodness, Wozniak immediately offered, "Well, I'll pay half if you will." He ended up not needing to. The agency was able to sell off the 30-second slot, but in an act of passive defiance, it didn't sell the longer one. "We told them that we didn't sell the 60-second slot, though in truth we didn't try," recalled Lee Claw. Scully, perhaps to avoid a showdown with either the board or Jobs, decided to let Bill Campbell, the head of marketing, figure out what to do. Campbell, a former football coach, decided to throw the long bomb. "I think we ought to go for it," he told his team. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Sports is teaching just like, hey, it's just Hail Mary. Let's just see what happens. And then, I mean, cause like you can always pivot, but it's like you don't know unless you don't know how to pivot unless you have to pivot. You know what I'm saying? This might just be one of the cases where you don't have to pivot. "Think we ought to go for it," he told the team. Early in the third quarter of the Super Bowl XVII. Oh shoot. VII. Nah, it's not right. Super Bowl. Cause I see the X and I see a V. I think the X is 10. V is 5. And 3 would make it 18. But there's no way. There's no way it was Super Bowl 18. Because I think we on Super Bowl. We on like Super Bowl 50. Something. Super Bowl 18. It's no way. It's no way this came out in Super Bowl 18. The dominant Raiders scored a touchdown against the Redskins, and instead of an instant replay, television screens across the nation went black for an ominous 2 full seconds. Then an eerie black and white image of drones marching to spooky music began to fill the screen. More than ah, so the Super Bowl commercials always come on the screens in yeah, the Super Bowl commercials always come on the screens in for like the scoreboard and stuff like that in what's his face in the stadium. I don't know if they still do that. Um, but yeah, spooky music began to fill the screen. More than 96 million people watched an ad that was unlike any they'd seen before. At its end, as the drones watched in horror the vaporizing of Big Brother, an announcer calmly intoned, "On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984." Ha! I like that. It was a sensation. That evening, all three networks and 50 local stations aired news stories about the ad, giving it a viral life unprecedented in the pre-YouTube era. Shout out YouTube. I learned a lot from YouTube. I ain't gonna lie. Shout out YouTube. It would eventually be selected by both TV Guide and Advertising Age as the greatest commercial of all time. Word. 1984 commercial by Apple. Greatest commercial of all time. Really set the stage for what we see now today at Super Bowl commercials and the Will Ferrell at the Will Cup. Set the stage for all that. Shout out Steve. Oh, Steve did a lot. I ain't gonna lie. Apple Super Bowl commercials, Pixar. Man, he tough. Um, publicity blast. Let's see how much do we have to do to get through this chapter. 164 to 170. That's 6 pages, fam. 6 pages. 6 pages, fam. We could do it. Get through the chapter, man. Bruh. Okay, let's. Okay. Man. Okay. Let's go ahead and knock this out. Ah. So, publicity blast. Over the years, Steve Jobs would become the grand master of product launches. In the case of Macintosh, the astounding Ridley Scott ad was just one of the ingredients. Another part of the recipe was media coverage. Jobs found ways to ignite a blast of publicity that were so powerful the frenzy would feed on itself, like a chain reaction. It was a phenomenon that he would be able to replicate whenever there was a big product launch. From the Macintosh in 1984 to the iPad in 2010. Like a conjurer, he could pull the trick off over and over again. Even after journalists had seen it happen a dozen times and knew how it was done, some of the moves he had learned from Regis McKenna, who was a pro at cultivating and stroking prideful reporters, but Jobs had his own intuitive sense of how to stoke the excitement, manipulate the competitive instincts of journalists, and trade exclusive access for lavish treatment. In December 1983, he took his elfin engineering wizards, added Andy Hertzfeld and Burroughs Smith to New York to visit Newsweek to pitch a story on the kids who created the Mac. After giving a demo of the Macintosh, they were taken upstairs to meet Catherine Graham, the legendary proprietor who had an insatiable interest in whatever was new. Afterward, the magazine sent its technology columnist and photographer to spend time in Palo Alto with Hertzfeld and Smith. The result was a flattering and smart 4 page profile of the two of them, with pictures that made them look like cherubim of a new age. The article quoted Smith saying what he wanted to do next. I want to build the computer of the 90s, only I want to do it tomorrow. Only want to do it tomorrow. The article also described the mix of volatility and charisma displayed by his boss. Jobs sometimes defends his ideas with highly vocal displays of temper that aren't always bluster. Rumor has it that he has threatened to fire employees for insisting that his computer should have cursor keys, a feature that Jobs considered obsolete. But when he is on his best behavior, Jobs is a curious blend of charm and impatience, oscillating between shrewd reserve and his favorite expression of enthusiasm. Insanely great. The technology writer Stephen Levy, who was then working for the Rolling Stone, came to interview Jobs, who urged him to convince the magazine's publisher to put the Macintosh team on the cover of the magazine. The chances of Weiner agreeing to display Sting in favor of a bunch of computer nerds were approximately one in a geogoplex. Levy thought correctly. Jobs took Levy to a pizza joint and pressed the case. Rolling Stone was on the ropes, running crummy articles, looking desperately for new topics and new audiences. The Mac could be his salvation. Levy pushed back. Rolling Stone was actually good, he said, and he asked Jobs if he had read it recently. Jobs said that he had an article about MTV that was a piece of shit. Dang. Levy replied that he had written that article. Jobs, to his credit, didn't back away from his assessment. Instead, he turned philosophical as he talked about the Macintosh. We are constantly benefiting from advances that went before us and taking things that people before us developed. He said, "It's a wonderful, ecstatic feeling to create something that puts it back in the pool of human experience and knowledge." Levy's story didn't make it to the cover, but in the future, every major product launch that Jobs was involved in, at Next, at Pixar, and years later when he returned to Apple, would end up on the cover of either Time, Newsweek, or Business Week. January 24th, 1984. On the morning that he had his teammates completed the software for the Macintosh, Andy Hertzfeld had gone home exhausted and expected to stay in bed for at least a day. But that afternoon, after only 6 hours of sleep, he drove back to the office. He wanted to check in to see if there had been any problems, and most of his colleagues had done the same. They were lounging around, dazed but excited. When Jobs walked in, hey, pick yourselves off the floor. You're not done yet, he announced. We need a demo for the intro. His plan was to dramatically unveil the Macintosh in front of a large audience and have it to show off some of its features to the inspirational theme from Chariots of Fire. It needed to be done by the weekend to be ready for the rehearsals, he added. They all groaned, Hirschfeld recalled, but as we talked, we realized that it would be fun to cook up something impressive. The launch event was scheduled for the Apple annual stockholders meeting on January 24th, 8 days away at the Flint Auditorium of De Anza Community College. The television ad and the frenzy of press review stories were the first two components in what would become the Steve Jobs playbook for making the introduction of a new product seem like a apocal, apocal, epochal moment in world history. The third component was the public unveiling of the product itself, amid fanfare and flourishes in front of an audience of adoring faithful mixed with journalists who were primed to be swept up in the excitement. Hertzfeld pulled off the remarkable feat of writing a music player in 2 days so that the computer could play the Chariots of Fire theme song. But when Jobs heard it, he judged it loudly. So they decided to use a recording instead. At the same time, Jobs was thrilled with the speech generator that turned text into spoken words with a charming electronic accent, and he decided to make it part of the demo. I want the Macintosh to be the first computer to introduce itself, he insisted. At the rehearsal, At the rehearsal the night before the launch, nothing was working well. Jobs hated the way the animation scrolled across the Macintosh screen, and he kept ordering tweaks. He also was dissatisfied with the stage lighting, and he directed Scully to move from seat to seat to give his opinion as various adjustments were made. Scully had never thought much about variations of stage lighting and gave the type of tentative answers a patient might give an eye doctor when asked which lens made the letters clearer. The rehearsals and changes went on for 5 hours, well into the night. He was driving people insane, getting mad at the stagehands for every glitch in the presentation. Scully recalled, "I thought there was no way we were going to get it done for the show the next morning. Most of all, Jobs fretted about his presentation. Scully fancied himself a good writer, so he suggested changes in Jobs' script. Jobs recalled being slightly annoyed, but their relationship was still in the phase when he was lathering on flattery and stroking Scully's ego. I think of you just like Waz and Markula, he told Scully. You're like one of the founders of the company. They founded the company, but you and I are founding the future. Scully lapped it up. The next morning, the 2,600 seat auditorium was mobbed. Jobs arrived in a double-breasted blue blazer, a starched white shirt, and a pale green bow tie. Hmm, this is good for Jobs. Bro used to just walk around barefoot. He used to not use deodorant. Said his vegetarian diet will make him smell decent. So this is good. Got a starched white shirt on, and he got a pale green bow tie. This is the most important moment in my entire life, he told Scully as they waited backstage for the program to begin. I'm really nervous. You're probably the only person who knows how I feel about this. Scully grasped his hand, held it for a moment, and whispered, Good luck. As chairman of the company, Jobs went on stage first to start the shareholders meeting. He did so with his own form of an invocation. I'd like to open the meeting, he said, with a 20-year-old poem by Dylan. That's Bob Dylan. He broke into a little smile. Then he looked down to read from the second verse of The Times They Are a Changing. His voice was high pitched as he raced through the 10 lines, ending with, For the loser now will be later to win. For the times they are a changing. The song was the anthem that kept the multimillionaire board chairman in touch with his counterculture self-image. He had a bootleg copy of his favorite version, which was from the live concert Dylan performed with Joan Baez on Halloween 1964 at Lincoln Center's Philharmonic 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 Hall. Scully Scully came on stage to report on the company's earnings, and the audience and the audience started to become restless as he droned on. Finally, he ended with a personal note. The most important thing that has happened to me in the last 9 months at Apple has been a chance to develop a friendship with Steve Jobs. He said, "For me, the rapport we have developed means an awful lot." The lights dimmed as Jobs reappeared on stage and launched into a dramatic version of the battle cry he had delivered at the Hawaii Sales Conference. It is 1958, he began. IBM passes up a chance to buy a young fledgling company that he invented that has invented a new technology called xerography. The 2 years later, Xerox was born, and IBM has been kicking themselves ever since. The crowd laughed. Hertzfeld had heard versions of the speech both in Hawaii and elsewhere, but he was struck by how this time it was pulsing with more passion. After recounting about IBM's missteps, Jobs picked up the pace and the emotion as he built toward the present. It is now 1984. It appears that IBM wants it all. Apple is perceived to be the only hope to offer IBM a run for its money. Dealers, after initially welcoming IBM with open arms, now fear an IBM dominated and controlled future and are turning back to Apple as the only force who can ensure their future freedom. IBM wants it all and is aiming its guns at its last obstacle to industry control. Industry control. Apple. Will Big Blue dominate the entire computer industry? The entire information age? Was George Orwell right? As he built to the climax, the audience went from murmuring to applauding to a frenzy of cheering and chanting. But before they could answer the Orwell question, the auditorium went black and the 1984 commercial appeared on the screen. When it was over, the entire audience was on his feet cheering. With a flair for the dramatic, Giles walked across the dark stage to a small table with a cloth bag on it. Now I'd like to show you Macintosh in person, he said. He took out the computer, keyboard, and mouse, hooked them together deftly, then pulled one of the new 3.5-inch floppies from his shirt pocket. The theme from the Chariots of Fire began to play. Jobs held his breath for a moment because the demo had not worked well the night before, but this time it ran flawlessly. The word Macintosh scrolled horizontally on screen. Then underneath it went. Then underneath it with the. Then underneath it, the words "insanely great" appeared in script, as if being slowly written by hand. Not used to such beautiful graphic displays, the audience quiet for a moment. A few gasps could be heard, and then in rapid succession came a series of screenshots. Few ga- few gasps could be heard, and then in rapid succession came a series of screenshots. Bill Atkinson's quick draw graphics application followed by displays of different fonts, documents, charts, drawings, a chess game, a spreadsheet, and a rendering of Steve Jobs with a thought bubble containing a Macintosh. When it was over, Jobs smiled and offered a treat. We've done a lot of talking about Macintosh recently, he said, but today, for the first time ever, I like to let you meet Macintosh. I like to let Macintosh speak for itself. With that, he strolled back over to the computer, pressed the button on the mouse, and in a vibrato but endearing electronic deep voice, Macintosh became the first computer to introduce itself. Hello, I'm Macintosh. It sure is great to get out of that bag, it began. The only thing it didn't seem to know how to do was to wait for the wild cheering and shrieks that erupted. Instead of basking for a moment, it barreled ahead. Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, I'd like to share with you a maxim I thought of the first time I met an IBM mainframe. Never trust a computer you can't lift. Once again, the roar almost drowned out his final lines. Obviously, I can talk, but right now I'd like to sit back and listen. So it is with considerable pride that I consider a man who's been like. It is with considerable pride that I introduce a man who's been like a father to me, Steve Jobs. Pandemonium erupted, with people in the crowd jumping up and down and pumping their fists in a frenzy. Jobs nodded slowly, a tight lip but broad smile on his face, then looked down and started to choke up. The ovation continued for 5 minutes. After the Macintosh team returned to Banley 3 that afternoon, a truck pulled into the parking lot and Jobs had them all gathered next to it. Inside were 100 new Macintosh computers, each personalized with a plaque. Steve presented them one at a time to each team member with a handshake and a smile. As the rest of us stood around cheering, Hertzfeld recalled it had been a grueling ride, and many egos had been bruised, but by Jobs' un, ah, by Jobs' obnoxious and rough management style. But neither Raskin nor Wozniak nor Scully nor anyone else at the company could have pulled off the creation of the Macintosh, nor would it likely have emerged from focus groups and committees. On the day he unveiled the Macintosh, a reporter from the Popular Science asked Jobs what type of market research he had done. Jobs responded by scoffing, "Did Alexander Graham Bell do any market research before he invented the telephone?" We got through it. Man, got bumpy there at the end. Felt like I kept stumbling on words. But, you know, that's one of the, pluses of doing this is I get like an added sense of, you know, motivation to like keep going, do something that I say I'm gonna do, say and try to finish. So like that's cool. Um, but yeah, that junk had me tired, boy. I think I'm only on like page 171 in this book. Like this is how much I've read. I have this much more to go. So like I'm on 171. I gotta go all the way to 584. 584. Um, Hopefully I see you back. Or hopefully I see myself back for day 4. Man, stay safe. If you're trying to read more, um, like I am, become more real red, more real red. See what I'm saying? This is why I'm doing this. More well read. Feel free to pull up a chair, man. Grab a book, crack it open, man. Tap in.